Hi, and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be incorporating the softer accent papers I recently made into a new mixed media piece. These papers can add so much to a work, but in this piece, they're going to be the supporting actors. The main inspiration will be a large botanical gel print on tissue. I am thinking that this one, with parts of this one, will make a good starting point. The colors are very neutral, which gives me a lot of flexibility. So now I go through my accent papers to see what would help support but not overwhelm my inspiration paper. My choices here will determine my color scheme. I already have some blues and a bit of the transparent red iron oxide, a brown, in here. So I'm thinking of what would go along with that. I like this one. I'm thinking that small pieces of it could be very nice included in this collage. Something like that is more subtle and might provide just a nice piece of background texture without adding a lot of focus. This one, again, is interesting in parts of it. The brown is fairly dark, so I'd have to make sure I could balance that out. That's another quite faint one, warmer. And then these two are, again, a little bit more lively, a little bit more color. So I'm thinking here that the color palette would probably be in the browns, the orangey brown, the transparent red iron oxide, the Indian yellow, with maybe some purple and blue accents. This is where this one is quite interesting because of the motley bluey gray pattern in the background. It might help pull together a piece like that and a piece like that. Okay, so now I've got an idea of the color scheme that I'm interested in. Now at this point, how I kind of like to put an underpainting on the canvas is just using the fluid acrylics and putting something down that's not too dark. Like I say, it's going to have lots of white in it. And I generally have a kind of composition in mind. So at this point, I'm thinking that I'll have something back in here, some color back in here, something in here, and then a bit of it at the bottom. And that will probably work quite well with the collaging process of putting some of these other papers in here as well. And then there'll be, quite like I say, quite a bit of the white to carry the design. Oops, blip. My nice clean paper that I just put down today for this video. And I want to get just a titch of the purple over here. Purple's quite powerful, so sometimes you don't need a lot of it. And if I don't need a ton of something, I will use this little palette beside me here so that I can just get a little bit of that on my brush and work it into the paint. Sometimes if I put it right on the canvas, well, that can backfire. And lots of paper towels to just wipe excess out of there as well. Now having a big brush like this can help with sort of getting, sort of rectangular shapes in here to start with. And then it just goes from there. So that's all I'm going to do for the moment. I'm going to go ahead and let that dry. And then maybe give the white a little bit more, maybe do a little bit more dragging in and out of things. But I think that will work out quite well with the basic composition. Whoops. Yeah, and where I kind of goof it up, well, that's okay too, because I can always go back and add a little bit more white. So my underpainting is dry. I'm not too worried about doing anything more at this time. It's got a basic structure I like. I have checked it with my inspiration tissue to see if what I'm getting is, what I'm kind of looking for. And yeah, I think I'm good with that. I can see through it to some areas and to see that the structure is probably going to work just fine. So you might ask, well, why do I bother doing an underpainting when I'm going to cover up a bunch of it now with some of these papers? And the primary reason why I like to do the underpainting first is if I'm putting this on a stark white background, it looks pretty intense. It might lead me to think that it was too much or too strong. Whereas if I've already got an area that's very similar in color to what I might be considering for this piece, then it blends in and it looks like it belongs. This initially struck me as a very kind of vivid piece of collage. But you can see that what I've put on here is actually going to make this blend in just fine. So I think that that's a good reason to put a layer of color on before. Plus, of course, it also makes me think about composition and how do I want it to flow and those sorts of considerations as well. Now, the next thing that I like to do is I like to take my papers that I'm going to be using, and I like to trim them. So I find it really hard to decide what I want out of here. I can't really hold it up and say, oh yes, that looks good, with all these edges in the way. So probably the easiest thing to do is to just have a little bit of a trimming session, either after you print them or perhaps just before you use them, and get rid of some of these messy edges and edges that you're probably not going to include anyway. Now, mind you, some of the messy edges, like those could make interesting collage pieces in their own. So I will save those, put them in one of my scrap bags, and pull them out for perhaps this piece later on or another piece. When I started to trim my papers, it really did become a whole lot easier to use them. So that's a good little thing to think about. Now that I've kind of got that going, I'm thinking about, okay, what could work in what areas of the canvas. And I'm looking at two basic shapes. One's going to be rectangular shapes, strips, things like that. This one, for example, I'm pretty sure I want a chunk of this to be down in this area. So, but I'm not going to use the whole thing. I just need a piece. And one of the things I want to take into consideration is I want to wrap the collage around the edges. So when I'm thinking about what part of this paper I might want to chunk off and use for this, I'm going to have to leave a bit for the edges. Now, to do this, the easiest thing that I've ever found is just using little pieces of framing L's. These particular ones, I just cut them out of a heavier piece of paper. They could be, like a scrap of something that you didn't use or a failed painting. A lot of people use mat board. I have some larger ones that I use with mat board. And then I can just basically put them on here. And again, I'm allowing for the fact that I need that extra little bit over the edges if I'm going to do this corner. And then I can take a look and see what would look interesting. Now, I'm kind of looking over here. I'm saying, okay, I've already got some sort of a shape there. It's not cast in concrete. It could change. I know I do want to keep this corner light. So I'm just thinking about what might work. And you know, that right there, I quite like that a little bit. So in this case, I'm going to give it a couple of little marks, just in pencil. I'll be able to get rid of these if I need to. And that tells me where I need to make some cuts. I'm using my cutting mat with a line over here to line that up. See how square I got it? That's not bad. And then I just use an X-Acto knife to cut. You could also use scissors. You could use some sort of ripping if you want to rip it. This is just rice paper. It's not very heavy. Actually, maybe I'll try ripping it on this side just to see how it looks. This allows you, if you want a good rectangle that's got square corners, you can get it. Oh yeah. So this paper rips very well. So my thought is that I would put that there approximately. Now I'd like to do something similar at the top. And I think I'm going to start with the darker piece. This is always a little bit of feeling your way along and seeing what makes sense to you. This piece is more accenty. I might use that one for a circle. This one I think could be a little bit of a background idea. So if I were to do something like that, that would work. So I'm just using my T here to make sure that I've got something left over for the side. There we go. And that'll go up in that corner. And then I quite like repeating things. I don't find that isolating stuff is a great idea. So there we are. I think that piece there. Now I have to remember to keep thinking about where my inspiration tissue is going to go. So I know that quite a bit of the stuff in this area, I'm going to be painting that out. The background will be very important. So I kind of like another strip, I think, over there. Okay, so those are the rectangular and shapes. I also really like to use circles in my work. Now for basic positioning, I find that using these white circles it gives me an idea of what size I might want to use and where they might want to go. By the way, I'm always pushing around papers. It's just part of the fun of collage. And I always have this inspiration piece next to me so that I can see if I'm creating myself any problems with placement or anything like that. So I'm always fooling around with it back and forth. Once you've once you've glued it down, it's a little late to decide that that was not where you wanted it. Now, what I did, and I've done this more than once, so I have multiple circles, is I just took a piece of, heavy-duty drawing paper and created some circles of different sizes on it and cut them out. Now, I cheated and cut them with my Cricut cutter because I can, and it's so much faster and easier. But you could easily do this with a craft knife as well. And then you end up with all these different sizes of circles that you can use in your compositions. Now, some of them have been used in my jelly printing as masks, so they've gotten colorful, darker. But that's okay too. Okay, so I'm thinking I have used pairs of circles in the past. I'm thinking I might want to do something a little bit different than that this time. So I might use more than two. Now, to make any kind of impact, you've got to decide what these circles would actually be in terms of value, etc., and what they might intersect, which would create something interesting. So, for example, a light circle overlapping this piece of paper here, the circle could either be painted opaque or it could be an opaque piece of collage paper. Now I've got this interesting chunk out of here that might work quite well. I'm always looking if there's a place for a larger circle, but this is a very narrow piece. So I'm thinking that the larger circles might not be good choices. So once I've kind of got an idea of where I want those circles to be, then I can kind of figure out what the circles should look like. I mean, they could be white on a darker background. This is a fairly light background. They could be actually a collage paper in this case. I think I want a smaller one there, and I want a little bit of a larger one there. That would be better. So this is where these come in. Once I've got an idea of what size and where those might be, then I'm now looking towards my other papers in accent colors, colors that could be a bit different, and to see where that might make a good circle. So down here, for example, against this purple, this Indian yellow would look quite nice. This circle is this one. So now I can go search and see what part of this might be interesting over here. Now, by the way, if you've got any problems with cutting papers up and saying, oh, I don't want to waste them, etc., etc., my solution to that is just go make more papers. If you just go and make more papers, then each paper won't feel as precious, and you'll be able to chop them up with great abandon. There we go. So this would become an element down here. I quite like that. I like that color. Now, if I'm going to go up against this piece up here, I'm going to need something that's fairly bright to do that. So I would think that this piece could work. Or the other possibility is to bring this purple up here. Oh, I like that. Okay, let's try that. So this one is that circle. So now I need an interesting piece out of here. And gosh, you know, this is not hard because just about everywhere I put this circle down is interesting on these papers. Primarily the paper is all about the color and the texture and stuff like that, but having been through some printing and some stencils, this is this rice paper that I've been printing on. It's really quite nice. It's thick enough to be a little bit more opaque and to hold up to multiple layers of paint, which I found the tissue is kind of, it stops being absorbent after a while. But it's not so thick as the other paper that I was using, the mixed media paper. It's just, so it's quite good. So, oh yes. So you can see here now I've got some nice things happening up in this area. And then for the last circle, which would be down in that area, I'm not thinking I need a lot more of any kind of contrast. Do I even need that circle? I do like the circle. So what would be a good piece of paper to take that out of? I think if I put something else there, then this could be an interesting circle down here, and it would just fit. I think this piece, if I took a section out of here, yeah, it doesn't need to be overly large. There we go. So I've got some warmer bits up at the top. I've got this color repeated, this color repeated, this color repeated, and then with a few little accents as well. So now my next step is to make sure that this still goes under, because this is a lot of stuff here, under the inspiration tissue. What I'm going to be doing with the inspiration tissue is wherever there's a blossom, I'm actually going to be painting that white in the final version and some of these stems, so that will make it sit in ahead of those. And I'll also be working into the other background layers. So yeah, it's a bit busy, but I think it will work. So the next thing that comes up is the overnight test. So I'm going to leave this here until tomorrow. I'm going to get up, have breakfast, and then I'm going to come out and look at it again, both with and without the inspiration piece on top. And basically I do that to see if it still looks good tomorrow. So if it still looks good tomorrow, then we're away to the races and I'll start gluing things down. And if it looks to be too busy or too cluttered, then I might make some decisions to reduce that. But I'm also not too worried about it, because once I've got that down, I can also bring paint back over top of it. So if I'm finding an area is just too busy, I can either dry brush paint over it, or I can give it a thin coat of transparent paint to kind of push it back a little bit. So we'll see how it all looks once it's sat overnight. Well, the layout that I had a couple of days ago didn't survive the overnight test. Quite a few of the elements did. So I still like, some of these elements that I put in. I liked the circles, but I just had a little bit of an issue with maybe too many papers, some of the papers being maybe a little bit too vibrant for basically what's an underlayer. So I spent pretty much all day yesterday pushing around papers into different places, cutting some more circles. This one got the boot, and just seeing how I could arrange this to suit me. So I've got the same paper here and here, and here and here, here, and then this is a new piece. I wasn't actually intending to use this particular paper, but it came in. It just works so well with that sort of creamsicle color up there. So I've chopped up a bunch of papers. They've had different things, and I've got a bunch of scraps now, things that didn't get used the way I thought they were going to. And the scraps will go into one of my scrap bags, and I'll use them at a later date. Nothing ever gets wasted. I also decided that there was a few too many harsh corners. So in collage, this is a little bit like edges, hard edges, soft edges, lost edges, etc. So these are fairly hard edges, especially up in here. And there was just a few too many of those. So I decided to do some tears on some of the paper. And just instead of having it harshly come down like that, I allowed this edge to be a little bit more varied. This one I left straight, but I tore this side, and then I tore a little bit off of this one as well. So I did that, and these papers, I'm very happy with this rice paper. They do tear in very interesting ways. That's not too hard to control. Now, while I've been doing this, I have been thinking about my edges. So I have got something, you know, going around each of the edges that will work in the long run. I've allowed a couple of the circles to go around the edges. So now what I want to do is add just a little bit more paint, break up a few of the harsh lines that are in here that I'm not sure I want. This little guy here, I'm kind of not in love with that, so I'm thinking I might do something with that. So all I'm using here is a little gift card. Well, it used to be a gift card. It's not a gift card anymore. I used all the dollars on it up. And I'm just using some heavy-bodied paint and taking just a bit of that onto the edge of the gift card. And then that just allows me to scrape into that. I want to create more edges. There we go. And just maybe give a little area of a little bit more white in some areas, and just interrupt a couple of the spaces that I'm not so in love with their edges. I can even bring it over top of some of the edges of the collage. And I do love the raggedy feeling that as I pull down there, I get all this splotchy stuff. And I do quite like that. So there we go. I think this is now ready for the application of the inspiration tissue. Just have to wait for a little bit for that paint to dry. It won't take very long. It's pretty dry here right now. And then I'll be applying paint over the inspiration tissue to a degree as well before I put on that final big tissue. Okay, so that paint layer has dried, and it's time to attach my big inspiration tissue. And so first thing I want to do is make sure that I've got it positioned where I want it. Just a few things about how the top meets up here. Do I want it to go right to the top, come around like that? I have to think about, you know, the sides, and just some of the things like the angles of these stems. So that's pretty much it. Now, once I've got this in position, it's important not to let it slip while you're doing this. So what I do is I hold it down firmly with my left hand. So I've got my pot of matte medium in here, so just a lot of it. I'm going to be using a lot of it. A nice big wide brush, at least an inch for something this size. You could go larger. So I'm going to hold it down firmly, peel it back, and just hold it back for a minute at the top. And what I'm going to do is apply the gloss, or pardon me, the matte medium all the way across this upper part. And I'm not going to go too far down. I just want maybe 3 or 4 inches, something like that. And just kind of spread it out. And I'm not going to worry yet about the edges and the wrap. And I want to make sure there's enough of this on here to firmly adhere this paper. And the more medium that I have, the more transparent this paper goes. Then I keep holding it firmly with my left hand, and then I brush it up with my other hand to stick it down. And then take my matte medium and go over the top. This is where it becomes a lot more transparent. And the matte medium is, it's murky, so you don't see that right away, but you'll see it when it's dry. It'll go quite transparent. So it acts as a bit of a veil of what's underneath. Now that's firmly held. So now what I can do is lift up this bottom part until I reach the sticky stuff. Might have to pull it up a little bit to make sure I've got all the different edges. And then again, I'll go down another chunk. And then once I've got that on there, I'm going to pull it down and smooth it over with my brush and some more matte medium. I've got a little bit of a tear there. You do have to be careful with any kind of tissue paper that you don't overwork this or get it too soggy and keep moving it, because it will rip. And there's no dawdling. You just have to get this done. So I like to just keep moving along with it fairly briskly. The paper does kind of expand a little bit as it gets wet, but I find that this method really does really reduce the wrinkling. I can get this paper down without a lot of major wrinkles in here. I'm not speeding this up at all. This is how fast I'm brushing it on. Now you don't have to use a whole tissue for this layer. You could use just pieces. You could take some from one botanical and mix it up with some from another. Okay, and then this is the point where I would wrap it around the edges. I make these big tissues on my 16 by 20 inch plate, and I cut the tissue paper, the way the tissue paper works out, it turns out to be 15 by 20, which still gives me a nice large image. And this one, I think I mentioned at the beginning of the video, was one that I'd already stolen a strip from, so it's not quite as wide as some of my other tissues. There. Good. So once it's goopy, you really don't want to fiddle with it too much, or you will have bits that will pull up. But you can see already how transparent this is becoming. And now my next phase would be to accent these motifs that I have from the inspiration tissue and highlight them a bit. So once this is dry, I'll see you back for that step. So now that the gel is dry, this matte medium, the stuff that I put on, you can really see how transparent that tissue went. It does have a very, very slight softening effect, and I kind of like that. It just sort of merges things nicely. But you can very clearly see these special papers that I've created for the collage process, and that I've put on underneath here. And it's a very beautiful combination. I think the colors have gone really well and the textures have gone really well with this overall motif that I've picked. So this video is primarily about using these collage papers. So I'm not going to take a lot of time to show you the painting process, but I do have a video specifically on adding paint to the mixed media. It's called Gel Printing and Mixed Media Video number 8. How's that for such an original title? And I'll leave a card to it up in the right-hand corner. Plus, I'll put a link in the description for you as well. So if you'd like to get more into the details of a veil and a glaze and, using opaque paint and increasing contrast and that sort of things, that would be the video for you to go to. But what I am going to do is show you some snippets of this painting process. I won't be adding a lot of paint at this point in time, but there are some things that I do like to kind of pick out. So in addition to making parts of the motif a little lighter, I also want to make some of those special parts of the motif that I like a little dark. Now at this point, I also have to think about the final piece of tissue. So the final piece of collage I'm going to be using is just a section of this. So probably this piece here, and it's going to go in the middle there. So I'm just thinking about it in terms of values. It will be the darkest value, and if I want to, I can accentuate its value some more as well. Now, if you've got any questions about the process that I've been using here, or any of the terms or anything that I've used, just leave a question in the comments and I'll get back to you. I always love to see comments and questions and stuff like that. It gives me an idea of what you guys are interested in. There we go. Okay, so that gives you a pretty good idea of what this is going to look like when it's finished. I will do a little bit more painting and highlighting in it. I will probably strengthen some of this dark in here just to pop it forward a bit. And also I'll be looking at the background colors, and where a background color is perhaps not the way I'd like, I may do a little bit of glazing in there with a related color to make it a bit richer. We'll see. Those are all finishing details that I have to deal with. But for now, I think this gives you a really good idea of how to take those collage papers, those soft accent papers that we made in a prior video, and use them in an overall collage work. How do you actually use your stash? Got to have some way of using it. So these botanicals that I created over the summer while the plants were available are just going really nicely now over top of these accent papers that I've created. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Like I say, if you did, please leave me a comment, let me know, and I'll see you soon.